This is Pat Tormey, and today we're going to be taking a look at how do I Winforms and the Entity Framework. I'm going to show you how easy it is to use the Entity Framework with a standard Windows form. We'll be working in Visual Studio 2010, and I'll go ahead and just start by creating a new project. It's going to be a Windows Forms application. How do I Winforms Entity Framework? That's a good enough name for it. There, now we have our form. Make them a little larger, and we'll make the font something bigger we can see. Now the next thing we have to do is come up with a data source, which is of course the point of this whole exercise. I'll say File, Add, a new project, and this time we use a class library. And the class library's name will be How Do I Winforms Entity Framework DAL for Data Access Library. Alright, we don't need class 1, it's not doing anything for us, so we'll just go ahead and delete that. It's going to be under Data, and it's the ADO.NET Entity Data Model. And I'll leave it with the name Model 1. First thing it's going to ask us is, do we want to generate from a database or create an empty model? And we're going the lazy way, so we'll just generate it from the database. Is the AdventureWorks Lite 2008 database. And say OK. We'll take a minute here and take a look. This is our entity connection string. There's a lot of references there, but here's the ones you need to see. The provider is going to be the system.data.sql client, and this is the typical connection string you'd expect to see for something connected to a local SQL Express. Now the reason we're using Entity Framework at all, it's kind of pivots around this point. We want to be able to change the back-end database at any time we need to without having to rewrite our own code. Now in this case we're using SQL Express, so obviously it'd be compatible to SQL. It says that the local data file is not in the current project, and we don't need it here now. Now we'll open this up and take a peek, and I'm only interested in the tables, and in fact we're only going to be looking at the product table, but I'll bring in product and product category. I'll bring in product and product category. I want you to see how the pluralized and singularized generated names objects works. This is new in the current version. Alright, let's see what we got here. I'll widen this up a little bit. Now the first thing you want to notice is that the table itself was a product table, but the entity set is pluralized for you. So this is the new part. It's actually the entity is the product and the entity set is the products. If you come over here to the category table, you'll see that the categories is correctly pluralized from the category to categories. Now the next thing you want to notice is that the navigation properties, which are here to represent the links from a 1 to many or a 0 to many, here it says that the product category can have more than one product, so therefore it's pluralized. But when you go to the child and you see that the product itself can have only one product category, so it's automatically made singular for you here. Now the next thing we want to look at is how to make our Winform talk to the data access layer. And there's a little secret in here. I'm going to show you what it is. I'm going to open up this app config file and find out from here what that connection string was we just looked at. And you see that connection string says that it's a SQL Express database. Now I need that information because here we're using the information solely to configure the data access layer, and this is specific to allowing the model to refresh itself against the database. But I'm going to need it over here in my Entity Framework Winform because he's actually going to call the data. So we're going to go over here to the Entity Framework project itself, the Winform side of it, and I exposed everything by saying show all files because I wanted you to see that there's a app config kind of not in use here. So we're going to open that up. And you'll see that a couple of things, but one of the things we need it to have is this connection string from the data access layer. So I'll come down here, grab the connection string we just talked about, go back to the app config, and just paste it in. Now what this does for us is make sure that the calling program, which is the Winform itself, has the connection string it needs to give it the connection to the actual data source. And when I save that, it becomes part of my project. So let's close that. And go back to our form. I'm going to do a quick build. Everybody seems happy. Okay, next thing I need to do is I need to make a reference to the data access layer. So I'll just go to References, add a reference, and of course it'll be sitting there in my projects list. And now that I have that reference, I can go over to my data sources, and I'll pin that open so you can see it, and tell it I need to add a new data source. In this case, we're going to an object, not to the database. And the reason for that is we'll be talking to the entity framework that's we'll be talking to the entity framework in the data access layer. And we'll just pick that guy right there and say finish. Now you see I readily have my product and my product category. And of course, as in the 2005 version, if I drop this down, I have the choice between a grid view and a details view, and I'll be perfectly happy with the grid view. Now watch what happens here, because it happens kind of fast. I'm going to drag and drop the products, and you see that here's my handy grid. And I'll tell that it's okay for him to dock in the parent container. Now what actually happened here, let me hide a couple things, just to give us some room. It actually created this tool right here, which is the product binding navigator, as well as the grid when I dropped it, and the product binding source. But if I run this right now, I haven't actually done anything to get the data. This information was all dragged in from the representation from the entity. So it's just a representation of the data. It's not the real data just yet. I'll save that and run it, just to prove nothing happens. And there you have it. Nothing happened. That means we have to wire up a couple of things. Code behind, view the form. Now, the first thing I want to do, of course, is set a reference to my other class with an import statement. And it's the data access layer. Now, inside my class, I need to have a way to actually bind to the data. So I need an instance of the data access layer. So what I'm going to do here is go get the entity for it. And I'm going to use a private variable. And it's going to be equal to a new Okay, so now when this form wakes up, the first thing he's going to do is go get himself a copy and then create an instance of. And now I need to have that instance bound to my current data source. So I'm going to go to my form events, drop this down to where I find the load event, and all I have to do here is tell it that me.product binding source dot data source is equal to okay, let's see how that looks. Again, we'll save it, give it a full rebuild. He's happy, so it should run. Of course, normally you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't just go grab all of the data. Okay, next thing we have to do is figure out some way to save this stuff. So I'll go back to my form, and I find this particular button. It's already set up for me in the Product Binding Navigator. And I'll hit F4, bring up the Properties dialog box. Now what I'd like to do here is to make that button enabled. And if I have it enabled, I can then move up to here and say, what do I want to do when they click it? Well, this is the issue of how I can save back. So I'm going to simply say mdb.savechanges. And that's a method that's already built into the data access layer, thanks to Entity Framework. I'll run it. And there you see I was playing with the data before, but I'll edit that box by changing these Z's to a bunch of Q's, just so we can spot it easily. When I move off the record, it's only in the local copy. So what we want to do now is just tell it to save it, and barring any errors talking to the database, I should be able to close this down and reopen. And when I do, I should see the Q's. And there they are. So there's a couple things we still have to do, a little bit beyond the scope of this session. We actually need to go in there and use LINQ to figure out how to query this. We want to sort some things, but you can see we're off to a pretty good start here. And so this is Pat Tormey. I've been showing you how do I, using Entity Framework with a standard window form.